June the 21st, 22nd. Did I smurf that up? 23rd. I knew I smurfed something up tonight. And we're going to cover a story from New Scientist. Big surprise. And Jim Smith from the University of Portsmouth, United Kingdom, who we've covered at least 100 times. On a bad day, you can always count for him to show up and give us some entertainment. So now they're saying that the food at Chernobyl is nice and safe, and you should buy it. I got everybody confused with the poll tonight, I notice. Would you eat the food from Chernobyl nuclear wasteland? So New Scientist, which is a major corporation, by the way, I'll show you that, can make money by misleading you, actually by killing you, making you liquidate your assets so you can get a few more years, or your loved ones. And so you get lost in 2011. There was a lot going on in 2011.
The Japanese Prime Minister appeared on TV to put into play a plan they'd rehearsed for years.
We will secure the safety of the people of Japan, and in order to minimize the damage, the government will make every effort possible. And we ask the people of Japan to continue to be cautious and vigilant and keep tuned in to the reports on the television and radio. And we ask the people of Japan to act calmly.
And so you had this tsunami. It was quite terrible. Then you had a lot of distractions, like an overwhelming amount of distractions, so-called. You had Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden got killed allegedly that year. They didn't show us the body for some reason. The Egyptian president, or keep the body to dump it at sea, because that makes a lot of sense. The Egyptian president so-called quit. Well, he was a puppet and he was retired by the industry. The Arab Springs. Muammar Gaddafi was killed in the most despicable way to kill somebody. Like, it's the way you like to see Shinzo Abe die, actually. But, you know, we'll take what we got. We're not complaining. Prince William got married. The English riots hit their peak. Steve Jobs died. I made a video, never got a single view. It was sacrosanct to say anything about Steve Jobs on that day. The English riots began, and North Korea Kim Jong-il died. Most likely assassinated, and they got away with it. And so you get lost in everything. And that brings us back even further to Chernobyl. It was the same thing with Chernobyl, where there was this war on against the USSR and the United States and NATO. NATO was created in response, right? And so there's a lot of very educated people suggesting Chernobyl wasn't an accident. But let's say it was an accident. The building blew up, it dispersed. It was a brand new reactor, 2 years old, and it was mostly graphite as a reactor. A typical reactor we're familiar with in the last number of decades are plutonium, uranium reactors. And Windscale in the United Kingdom was another graphite reactor that melted down, for instance. You managed to cover it up. So then New Scientist put out, of course we've covered New Scientist a number of times over the years. I got no concept of what there's of how they can get themselves to work each day, how they can make it to the desk. They must have Sally Ann's helping them all day long. Because these people are either the most incompetent or they're the most evil people in human history. I hate to think somebody could be that evil. 2017, radioactive boar found in Sweden. That's a long way away from Chernobyl. I'm just saying, right? How can it be nice to eat food around Chernobyl when you can't eat? Or the boar at 13,000 atoms per kilogram of cesium, I think it was. So who knows how much uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium's everything. The limit set by Sweden Food Agency is a stunning and crazy and insane, unimaginable, inconceivable. 1,500 atoms a kilogram is considered legal for food. That tells you how bad Sweden is. I actually got a bunch of studies on Sweden coming up. Reindeer are still very radioactive 30 years after Chernobyl. The reindeer, so it's not just the wild boar, for instance. It's the reindeer still very active 30 years after Chernobyl. And the problem with it is you have so many ways you can get the stuff into your body just from a nuclear plant, let alone a nuclear meltdown. And actually, it's a great show if you want to learn about nuclear meltdowns, this particular one. Because whenever we get useful idiots like Jim Smith, we got a tendency to have a bit of fun at their expenses. Well, they're trying to murder you, so we might as well have a bit of fun at their expense, right? They 100% are trying to murder you by suggesting the food is safe, as you'll see coming up. And this, again, they have one experts. We're going to bring in probably 100 altogether to counter that single one that they got. They got one corrupt so-called expert who actually turns out to be a monster that we've covered at least 100 times. The explosion is considered the worst civilian nuclear disaster in history. Worst civilian nuclear disaster. They like using that in order to absolve themselves of what they've done in their countries, right? If you look at Hanford in the United States, that's infinitely worse than Chernobyl. So was Los Alamos National Laboratory, for instance. So was Marshall Islands. Just when you set off Castle Bravo, which is equal to 1,000 Nagasaki nuclear weapons going off at one time. But these were meltdowns. I'm not mitigating it, as you'll see during the show. I'm just saying, they got so many of these. Why would you want to grow food? Because they do really strange stuff. Like they rebuilt Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and moved people back into those cities so they can study them. Not for any noble purposes, but so they can study them like lab rats on ground zero. You don't see people out there trying to buy a nuclear wasteland to build their house on, or their office, or their factories, because they won't let you do it, right? But they get away with certain things, and we take it for granted and don't ask any questions. That doesn't mean that everything is great, obviously. It coated the earth with toxic material. Coated the earth. It's safe to grow food by the nuclear wasteland, according to Jim Smith from the University in the United Kingdom. We'll cover it. It's turned the reindeer radioactive and poisoned the Sami people's way of life. 30 years after nuclear power plant exploded at Chernobyl, the reindeer that walked the picturesque snow-capped mountains of Scandinavia and Latvia are still radioactive. So then that's far away, so how can it be safe at ground zero or within 100 miles of it, for instance? When 1,000 miles away, it's a nuclear wasteland. The radioactive material poured into the lakes and the forests and contaminated the wildlife, the berries, the plants. That's in Sweden. But they're saying it's safe now to grow it in the abandoned nuclear wasteland. It also got a spindly green fungus called lichen, a reindeer's favorite snack that is known to bioaccumulate radiation. For 9,000 years, the Sami people tied their cultural identity to the reindeer, and the animals provided food and income, tradition, clothing and blankets and shelter and passed it on. Chernobyl brought an abrupt end to it. Something they've been doing for 9,000 years, a nuclear accident was able to end a 9,000-year legacy because the wildlife, the plants, the trees, the water, the snow, everything is radioactive forever. My apologies. You got to drink the tea when it's hot. You know how it works, right? Which is another study, too, about that chromosomes aberrations, Norwegian reindeer. So it wasn't just Sweden, for instance, even though I guess Norwegians are... They're all part of Europe, right? The herders went from living this timeless lifestyle, completely at one with nature, to suddenly working in one of the most contaminated places on Earth. But the farms are all good now, 30 years later, Dana. Don't believe these... Farmland near Chernobyl nuclear reactor is finally safe near the Chernobyl, near the nuclear meltdown. The radiation doesn't go away, it bioaccumulates. It's even worse there now because the plants and the trees and everything else are bioaccumulating it for 38 years. It doesn't go away, it doesn't mitigate, it doesn't drop down. It never goes away. It recirculates. Every time you have a forest fire, it liberates all these hot spots back into the ecosystem, which bioaccumulates it even more. Decades later and far away, Chernobyl disaster still contaminates the milk. That's 2018. It's not very long ago. All of these are recent. At the University of Exeter in Britain and the Ukrainian Institute of Agricultural Radiology, the people know that the milk is unsafe. We don't have a choice. They say we have to feed it to our family. These are rural communities. The people are poor. And so the worst type of bioaccumulation. And the result, she said, is that the children are still drinking contaminated milk. It's 33 years later or something. Exposure can cause an array of health problems, cancers, cardiac, digestive ailments, heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. To decrease radiation to acceptable levels, just in the village just studied, home to only 800 people, costs about $80,000 a year, which is 1/3 of Jim Smith's wages. So if you got rid of him, put him in jail and took his money each year, you could get this village and many other villages away from radioactive consumption, right? Especially at the vulnerable children. I know, it's crazy talk. Farmland near Chernobyl, doing something good is crazy. See, when it comes to nuclear, that's the problem. Because every time you suggest doing something good, they're like, "Wow, you crazy? That's never going to happen. It's nuclear, Dana." The very last thing to happen. Farmland near Chernobyl nuclear reactor is finally safe to reuse again. Radiation surveys suggest it is now safe. It takes a while to get to the main stories a lot of time around here, if you're not familiar. Radiation surveys suggest that it is now safe to grow food on farmland. This is New Scientist. Don't forget that for the rest of the night. I won't let you forget that, rather, for the rest of the night. It's more like it. That has been unused since the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. But changing its status would face local opposition in Ukraine. There's still 6,000 children a year need open heart surgery because of Chernobyl. All your little nightmares will come back to haunt you, is what you're worried about. Large areas of farmland and around the nuclear reactor that are officially classed as contaminated, now appear to be safe, said one single expert, for use to growing food. Darn it. A survey show radiation levels are found below the levels regarded as unsafe, according to the Ukrainians' regulations, as if they got any regulations, as if they had any meaning to it. Changing the status of the nuclear wasteland could help compensate for farmland lost as a result. So their motive is, because Russia took a lot of their valuable farmland, they got no choice but to open up the nuclear wasteland. Well, why would you grow food in a nuclear wasteland? Isn't that like the stupidest thing you could do? it was only last year where this is the same places where the Russian soldiers were getting radiated. Look at the size of this Chernobyl new evolution. Look at the size of this mosquito. That's the standard size. But look at the size of the one that showed up. And just, oh my goodness, eh? So the last video was a surprise video on Friday because I feel guilty if I don't get 5 shows in a week. And it was an hour 28. Hour and 22 minutes, 28 seconds. It got 6 seconds longer or 8 seconds longer. I had 43 views, allegedly, which is next to none, right? I had 1 viewer waiting, 22 likes. So at 11 hours, it's still 1 hour, 22 minutes, 28 seconds. Every video, when it gets past at the 12-hour mark, it either gains or loses numbers. Typically gains, in this case, 8 seconds. And so we believe they're putting software in it. It's very important to watch the video in the first 12 hours if you're in a position that you could do that. They don't do it to anybody else's video for some reason. Just Dana. Special. See what I mean? You got to be special like Dana to get screwed around that bad. Are nuclear power plants and nuclear dumps surrounded by farms to make us sick and kill us by design? That was the poll last time, and I forgot to get a useful capture of it. And the poll this time, of course, is somewhere. Would you eat food from Chernobyl nuclear wasteland so new scientists can make money by misleading you? But what happened tonight was I got a lot of people tricked because I'm always a yes poll. 1 in 100 or something is a no. And so this one was a no. Incidents of illegal abortions in Sweden after Chernobyl. So you're going to see a lot of the kids from the orphanages after Chernobyl. There's still huge groups of foundations that go down and help these children. There's around 6,000 surgeries a year, open heart surgeries for congenital malformation. Legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. Some of these pictures are going to be hard. Down syndrome, autism, severe cases are common in Belarus and Ukraine and places like that. Pregnancy outcome in Norway after Chernobyl. Radioactive fallout, neural tube defects. Early infant mortality in West Germany before and after Chernobyl. So Chernobyl coded the whole friggin'... They done actual studies on the entire Europe. And there was 9,400 farms closed in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom, which means all your fresh water was contaminated too. And so they have foundations that go down there and take the kids and give them some comforts when they can raise the money, right? But they also are providing, I think it is 6,000 surgeries even this year in Chernobyl and Belarus and Ukraine, rather. You're going to see free surgery for the children's for born. Go and look up the documentary Chernobyl Hurts. It's a hard documentary. But it's debilitating illnesses for the kids if they don't get the surgery. Effects of radiation on the reproductive system. So, like, I want you to look at all these studies and look at these victims and ask yourself, would you eat the food if they grew food there? And why would anybody advocate growing food there when they have better access than I do to the documentation? So the University of Portsmouth, James Smith, has to be pretty heartless to ignore the victims and then put the nuclear on a pedestal. Induced brain cognitive impairments, and we see so much of it, right? Incidents of illegal abortion, congenital abnormalities in Hungary. Schizophrenia in the aftermath of Chernobyl. So radiation, 6 times more breast cancer within 15 miles of a nuclear power plant. We'll go through lots of them as we're going through this stuff tonight. Trends in the human sex odds at birth in Europe and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They were looking for more males than females being born in Europe. They were doing it by countries too. But generally in Europe, secondary sex ratio trends in associated gender-specific birth rates or birth males to female ratios near nuclear facilities in France and Germany. So the reason you're doing all of these studies, this is 2020, trends in birth sex ratios in the vicinities of the research reactor. So why would you study a population birth rate within square miles of a nuclear plant? Because you're looking for more males than females, which means less population down the road. And imagine what that's going to do to the insects and birds and mammals and animal populations. And so when you talk about climate change and insects and animals and that, think about where the study's done before you start making. Human sex ratio at birth and residential proximity to nuclear facilities in France. So there's a lot of information. These are after Chernobyl. This one was after Fukushima, I think. But you see a lot, just an endless amount of these after Chernobyl and all of Europe. And there's even sex ratio studies worldwide after the worldwide nuclear testing, which is the same bombs you use in a nuclear war. So the radioactive fallout is the same thing. Food said to be grown near Chernobyl 38 years after the nuclear disaster. One expert believes. So if one believes, then we got to ignore all the other evidence, is it? But that's how they do it to people, right? That don't have, I shouldn't use those words, I suppose, but common sense. They're just 100% trusting because someone has the word professor. We should do, like, if we done a study on how many professors in the nuclear industry and universities are corrupt, because we can back it up with documentation, it's probably 100%, I would imagine. That's what we do here. We take the best of the best on the planet, we look deep at their narratives, and if they're lying, we show the evidence and we move on because you can't keep up with it. And I want to do interviews, but how are you going to do interviews when you got so much corruption? See, one of my biggest fears used to be, if I does interviews and you got these people coming on the show saying stuff that's not true, it becomes very confrontational because I'm not going to sit there and take it. And so you would run out of willing participants quite quickly because that's what they do, they lie. And so we cover the news cycles typically, and I got a big news cycle ready for tomorrow night, for instance, that I was supposed to do tonight, and you couldn't do it tonight because yesterday evening, this story came out about Chernobyl and food, and I was like, my goodness, if I don't challenge it, nobody's ever going to challenge it, and that needs to be challenged appropriately with a lot of documentation. Because there's a lot of people out there, there's a lot of fake studies out there to persuade. So as long as we try our best, and we do this every day, unfortunately, at least you can sleep that night without pains of conscience, right? Uptakes of radionuclides by plants after Chernobyl. So uptake of radionuclides, not cesium-137, but radionuclides by plants after Chernobyl. Let me get better in the picture. Actually, we got that. Should work out. World Health Organization, UNSCLEAR, the International Atomic Energy Agency. UNSCLEAR, United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, the ICRP, the International Commission on Radiation Protection, and the BIR, they would make worldwide dose limits. And these people are all the same people on each of the committees, and they're all United Nations, the same one. World Health Organization, UNSCLEAR, International Atomic Energy Agency, the ICRP, and BIR are all the same. They're all United Nations with the same people on different committees. The same gray hair 100 people. You'll find them in all the committees. They ignore the human fetuses, internal emitters, genomic instability, latency, every radiation-induced cancer except thyroid cancer. And there's heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. And like when you hear cesium, you'll hear potassium being invoked a lot too, right, to confuse you. And that's what Jim Smith is going to do at University of Portsmouth. Just give me 1 second. There we go. So one of their tricks is to talk about it's like bananas and potato chips. It's like potassium 40. And everything got potassium 40. But they'll typically talk about bananas, just like bananas or potato chips or walking in the sunshine or getting on an airplane or climbing mountains or sleeping next to somebody. Some of the crazies will tell you it's like peanut butter, eating peanut butter, 10 cups of peanut butter or something stupid. Or 15 minutes in the kayak, for goodness sakes. So potassium has 0.000071 curies per gram. And a curie is 37 billion anthropogenic man-made atoms, not natural atoms like potassium 40. So there's 71 10 millionths of a curie per gram. If you've got a gram of potassium 40, you can eat it all day like it was sunflower seeds or something. Like you're a 200-pound canary. Chirp. Cesium-137 has 88 times 37 billion anthropogenic man-made atoms, let's put it that way, per gram. And strontium-90 with 140. And that's important, 140 times 37 billion atoms. Just a single atom will get you sick in 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. Your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. But imagine being in a nuclear wasteland where you're bioaccumulating this stuff, see? And the amount we're talking about are extraordinary. You're talking multiple tonnage, tens of thousands of tonnage. Congress proceedings, 1992. Agricultural countermeasures taken in the Chernobyl region. This is 1992. Agricultural countermeasures. The evaluation of cesium activities in plant drugs in the Chernobyl, Ukraine, Belarus area. So they grow plants to make drugs, and those plants are radioactive. And then you're going to make pharmaceutical drugs and give it to people. Try wrapping your mind around that statement, because that's what's been going on. And Chernobyl, or Ukraine, was the breadbasket for a lot of the very, very impoverished nations worldwide for their grain. Radioactive grain. It's impossible not to have it, as you'll see before the show is over. Food set to be grown near Chernobyl 38 years after nuclear disaster. We're still not past the picture on the first story. We'll get there. Maybe. Transferred Chernobyl-derived cesium-134, 137, 131 from flowers to honey to pollen. And then when you got radioactive pollen, it's not just a single time on top of that. And so the ants and pollinators that are bringing it back to their community is destroying the community with this radioactive bioaccumulation in the beehives and that. One expert, And so I showed you many, 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 many experts here already, probably 35 or 40. And we're not even really started yet. That's the sad part about it. That's why I only get 10 or 20 people on my show. Too much facts, too much information. You're confusing people. Only the good ones find me. That's the way I like to see it. Which is true, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, I should say. The variability of Chernobyl's cesium retention in water, column of lakes in the English Lake District. So variability of Chernobyl's cesium retention, 2 years and 4 years after disposition. So it's bioaccumulating in something, if it's there. Anyway, it doesn't go away. It's not stardust. There's nothing on the planet that's an autoimmune trigger to defend against it, right? It destroys everything. It attacks everything with replicating cells. So there is nothing safe. Nothing is sacred. Food set to be grown near the Chernobyl 38 years after the nuclear disaster. One expert. He's an expert. Here's another expert. How about this, guys? 239, 240, 238 plutonium. That's not going away for 250,000 years. The strontium's not going away, or the cesium-137 for a couple of 100 years, 300 plus years. These are just guesstimates, really. They haven't been around for 300 years to check and find out, right? Concentrations in surface air in Austria due to the dispersion of Chernobyl releases. What are you doing all these studies in all these countries for? But no, that doesn't. None of this matters because there's one expert that believes it's okay to grow the food. Contamination food of Czechoslovakia by cesium radioisotopes from Chernobyl accident. Once contaminated, it's always contaminated. That's just standard science, right? Chernobyl fallout in Finland, hot areas. That's not going away. And when that bioaccumulates up the food chain, baby, it's not cool. I'm going over half an hour now. My tea must be over half an hour. My tea's getting cold. How sad is that? We know, because we do it so much. Hot areas, hot spots, radioactive hot spots. So all the little animals and bees and insects and the plants and everything in that area are getting brutalized. And then they're contributing to the DNA, the genome, to the biosphere. And so you're getting, when you get all this opportunity for mutations and deformities, like it'll show up in the insects, animals world long before it shows up in the humans, right? We're way up the food chain. And it showed up in the humans very strongly, and I got more of that coming up. Managing a radioactive fallout. Think about that statement right there, 1989. This is the British Veterinarian Journal. The Swedish experience after Chernobyl. The Swedish managing, because it infiltrated everything in their country. If they were smart, they would have left their country for 300 years and hoped to rain in the snow. Denigrated enough they can come back. They might as well. They should have had tunnels. They should have been living in tunnels for the next 1,000 years there. Pregnancy outcome in Sweden after Chernobyl. What are you doing studies like that for? So far away. Because if you're doing studies like that and you're spending all this money and time and energy and effort, then it ain't going to be safe near ground zero, is it? Transfers of radionuclides dose assessments to ants and anthills in the Swedish forest ecosystem. And because it permeates everything, so they can just choose whatever is available and start studying it for the radiation. Everything bioaccumulates it, and it attacks everything. So anything with replicating cells, you can do a study on it. It's easy money. They'll give you the money. Especially if you're... they don't care about repeating studies either. They actually, I think there's 4.3 million studies every year done free for the universities do free, which is paid for by the countries, taxpayers. And the vast majority of it goes to the nuclear industry. There's 9,000 facets to the nuclear industry. And so they have to, by proxy, they take over the universities. They infiltrate the universities. And they're so voracious. It's such a big industry that they're out there scooping the university students, get them when they're young, dumb, right? Shatter them or throw lots of money at them. Make them feel obligated, even make them obligated to pay the money back or to go to work for them to pay the money back. Easy money, and all you got to do is taste like a banana and a potato chip, and life is great. Cancer in Sweden derived from fallout. There should be equal studies on heart problems and liver problems and lung problems and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline. Now, like when the thyroid is radioactive, producing radioactive hormones for the species or humans, their skeleton is going to be producing radioactive stem cells at the same time, because you cannot have one without the other. Because if you got all that gamma emitting showing up in the thyroids and adrenaline and the pituitary glands, then you're going to have equal betas, for instance, going to show up in the bones and the skeleton of every species. And so they knew this a long time ago. And we can show you the studies on the dogs, for instance. Out of 144 beagle dogs and beagle puppies, 91 of the dogs died of bone tumors from a single plutonium inhalation. Long-term variations of post-Chernobyl strontium, cesium, plutonium, concentrations in the air, disposition to the ground, radioactive fallout, resuspension, like from droughts or from forest fires or from construction, and resuspension rates in South Germany. Well, it never stops. You can't destroy it with a forest fire. You can't destroy it in the incinerators. One expert believe more than 80% of the surveyed territory. Now we're starting to get into the story a little bit. I know you're pretty proud of me right now, aren't you? About time, Dana. It's a complicated story, right? And the implications is just death, disease, illnesses, heartbreak. Constantly everywhere that's eating the food, right? One expert believed more than 80% of the surveyed territories near the Chernobyl nuclear plant can be returned to the agricultural production. Thyroid radiation doses in Britain arising from Chernobyl. So, this stuff wasn't just limited. If it's causing that much harm in all of these different countries, Chernobyl, within 100 miles of that, trying to grow food is simply intolerable. It's just, why would you do that? Just because you had a war and you lost all that land, you can't just go into a nuclear wasteland. My goodness. Radiocesium in the aquatic invertebrates in Norway. And one of the problems when you're seeing these studies about the fresh water, for instance, the implications, you can't grow food without water. There's nothing can survive without water. Everything you're eating has got water in it, right? It's because of water. And if you're finding it in these huge amounts, then your fresh water is not safe either. Propagation of the Chernobyl impulse of 131 iodine through the air grass milk pathway northwestern Greece. So it's covered very long distance in very large amounts for a very long period of time. And we got the documentation that clearly shows this is not a very good idea. One expert, here's another couple for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more for you. Disposition of Chernobyl fallout northeast Italy. Here's another couple. Transport of iodine 131, 137 cesium from ears to cow's milk, northwestern Italian farms following Chernobyl. Here's another 4 experts. Analysts of the radioactivity levels in soil and crops from the Campanian region, South Italy after Chernobyl. All of those, and that's just a fraction of the studies on Italy, obviously, because of that bioaccumulation, that these adverse side effects. And it's not just Italy, obviously, right? It's not just Turkey. It's not just United Kingdom. It's not just Poland. It's not just Hungary or Austria, Slovakia, Czech. And I can show you studies from all of them, and I probably will before the night's out. France, we got studies coming up from the Alps. Hot spots, too. The transfers of plutonium to cow's milk. Here's some more experts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more experts. Does any of that count? To their one expert, I'm showing you all of these experts. Does that mean anything anymore? Radiocesium. Every time you see the word cesium with an A, that's a British. And you know they're going to be low life. No matter what the study is, they're not going to tell you the truth. They're inherently corrupt. I just totally disrespect them. Everything for the nuclear industry in Britain, nothing but contempt for them. Radiocesium contents of meat in Italy after Chernobyl accident. There are changes during the cooking process. This is what I mean by it. They're claiming that if you cook the food, you get rid of most of the radiation, if not all of it. This is insanity. It doesn't work that way. Not only that, the food becomes radioactive because it has radiation in it. You know, actual physical radiation. And so it's pulsing energy constantly and it's radiating everything around it. So you're eating mutated whatever you're going to be eating. Calculations individual effective dose equivalent in Italy. Individual effective dose equivalent in Italy following Chernobyl. That's such a crazy statement, right? Calculation of the individual of every person in... Why would you do that calculation for? Unless there's... So why would you eat food from Chernobyl? And I know I hooked a lot of people on the poll tonight because I got a no vote. I got your gut tonight. That happens every time I have a yes or a no poll. We usually get around that percentage or worse. Yeah. Oh, I didn't bring it up, did I? I just bring it up and then just realized I looked at the screen and wasn't there. Would you eat food from Chernobyl nuclear wastelands so new scientists, journalists, can make money by misleading you? And we always hook a few people on the... It's almost always a yes poll, right? Studies of iodine, 137, and rubidium in milk, meat, and vegetables, northeast Scotland. I'm going to have to go back to this one, I think, tonight. It was just we got... I've done that again, did I? What have I got done here? There we go. I apologize. We'll get there. Concentrations of iodine in the urine in 1988 of the Japanese adults and children. Concentrations of iodine 131. It's okay though, all the food in the nuclear wasteland is now safe. It's just not safe anywhere else on the planet. Factors contributing to radiocesium variability in upland sheep flocks in West Colombia. So they closed 9,400 farms. It wasn't, because we got, I don't know where that stuff is to right now, but it's actually 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom because of Chernobyl. 300 to 400 are still closed today. But the farms around the nuclear wasteland will be fine. For goodness sakes, don't believe it and don't promote it. I was just a little bit shocked, but not surprised when I seen it was from New Scientist. I was like, oh. Count on the scumbags to give us a couple of ha-has on Sunday anyway. Measuring the radiation exposure of Norwegian reindeer under field conditions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 50 more experts. Did they count, I wonder? Or did we just one expert only? hot particles in Finland from Chernobyl. This is just a screen capture of the plume. The plume eventually covers the whole planet. These are tanks and helicopters. Some of these helicopters are only used once. They're so radioactive they could never be used again. But that's quite stunning, the pictures. I got quite a few of these pictures of all the equipment that was abandoned because it's radioactive. Food set to be grown. They just had another forest fire 2 days ago around Chernobyl. Food set to be grown near the Chernobyl 38 years after the nuclear disaster. One expert. I got some more experts you might want to check out first, though. Transfers cesium and tea and other food to men and women and children after Chernobyl accident all the way over in Turkey. Radioactive iodine and fungi in central Italy after Chernobyl. Transfer of Chernobyl fallout, cesium, radioisotopes. Every time I see the word cesium with an A, I just immediately assume there's going to be corruption there somewhere. And if I look, then you're going to find it. Hey, but one lousy expert, can dictate and poison millions or billions of people, and it's all good. That's what they're there for. That's what a professor's job is, to destroy everybody's future. The farmland near Chernobyl. So how can you, when you got professors like that, know what a professor is calling them out? How can you ever trust a professor, see? I got a folder here on sadistic professors only. Maybe I'll bring that up when we find Jim Smith here in a bit. The farmland near Chernobyl nuclear reactor is now safe to produce the food. 38 years. See, that's simply not true. That's 100% conjecture. But of all the media, which there was, coming out saying that same thing over and over, a lot of people are not able to understand the nuances, the details, the minutiae. Survey has shown that the radiation levels have fallen below the threshold of unsafe as per Ukrainian regulations. It's just don't go over there or over here. Or the National University of Life and Environmental Science of Ukraine, which is the credibility of a fruit fly, have been monitoring the radioactivity of the farmland near Chernobyl along with his colleagues. Speaking to that perpetually degenerate new scientist, he said more than, not just 80, but 80-something% of surveyed territories can be returned to the agricultural production. We don't need a peer-reviewed studies. Radioactive 4 exploded at Chernobyl, spreading radioactive isotopes of the elements including, I always hate it when I see that because you know they're just going to limit it to iodine and cesium, which you know there's a British involved in it, and strontium. You can't have cesium without strontium, and plutonium, which is shocking that they even include it, really. I got tons of studies showing it. Plutonium, other alpha emitters in the mushrooms from Poland, Spain, and Ukraine. So that's the last. By the way, mushrooms are very common, but it's one of the last things you'll ever see in my house. Well, you won't see it in my house. I won't buy it. Into the atmosphere, because we have so much fallout now for the last 80 years. It's just, why do that to yourself? Because it bioaccumulates. Some of the numbers we've seen are friggin' terrifying. That's leukemia in a bowl, basically, for you or your loved ones. The area around the plant will be inhospitable for 20,000 years. This is actually plutonium-239, got a half-life of 24,000 years, for instance. And there's 10 half-lives, so 240,000 years. I can show you the studies on why. I will in a moment, actually. The radioactivity was detected across Europe, when it wasn't just Europe. And one scientist believes the area of Ukraine will not be hospitable. No, they're trying to lull you into complacency. However, the iodine-131 that was released after the explosion has a half-life of just 8 days. And which it means it's basically disappeared in 80 days. And then they put their meaning it declined to a safe level within years. And I was like, this was obviously to confuse them. They don't want to give them evidence. So give them something that's not true, so that when they're trying to understand it or have a conversation about it, it keeps the other people confused too, right? Anybody else who's trying to put the narrative together. After the explosion has a half-life of just 8 days. And so why would you even mention that 38 years later? Because that's great propaganda. That's downright brilliant propaganda. And you know they're scumbags. They should be arrested and waterboarded at least 190 times so you can find out what other crimes they were committing. Legally, right? The government's already got a legacy of doing it. They can do it. I don't think anybody should be waterboarded unless they're a nuclear scientist or something. Then I think makes perfect sense. Make them tell you everything and make them verify it. The transfer of cesium-137 strontium-90 from soil to food crops after Chernobyl, 1994. So they've done the studies. There's so much of it. Land in the immediate, back to the story. We're still not through a single one of these stories, and I apologize, but it's a complicated story. Land in the immediate vicinity of reactors remain unsafe. However, the land further out has fallen below the threshold, even if it is still classified as contaminated. Land in the immediate vicinity remain unsafe. However, the land further out, has fallen below the threshold, even if it's still classified. So it's classified as contaminated, but it's below the threshold level. And so why do you, this isn't the indoctrination machine, is where you see that narrative framed that particular way. 1993, effectiveness of countermeasures applied in Belarus to produce milk and meat with acceptable levels of radioactive cesium. Well, you can't, and you only got one name on the study, so guess what that was all about? To give them a study that they don't have to quote the academics, they can just say, here's a study, right? Saying it's safe. And you can't quantify it that way because there is no acceptable level. Because the whole country is radioactive, they just raised the level to the norm, what is normal, now that they had the accident, and call that safe. And then, of course, they would give it a hell of a lot of leeway on top of that. It's just despicable, eh? There's Chernobyl Reactor 4. About 130,000 hectares of farmland outside the exclusion zone is classified as contaminated but could now be safe, said a single expert that happens to have an incredible legacy of being a douchebag, a scumbucket, a monster, really, a killer, a mass murderer. These people are, whoever's doing the studies, or who's ever advocating, which is a new scientist, for instance, Jim Smith from the University of Portsmouth, some people like that. These are serial killers, plain and simple. Female reproduction areas of radiation influences after an accident at Chernobyl nuclear power plant. So why are you doing these studies? Involvement, bladder lesions induced by long-term, low-dose ionizing radiations in humans. That's post-Chernobyl. Bladder lesions, that's permanent, right? From the radiation. Radioactive contamination of the aquatic ecosystem following Chernobyl 1995. It's forever. It never goes away, and everything is bioaccumulation after this. It never goes away. Radiological, and as you see by the destruction, there's lots of pieces released into the ecosystem that are splitting atoms, right, on top of that forever. Radiological agricultural issues are the easiest part of the problem, says the National Institute of Strategic Studies in Kiev. This is insanity to suggest that radiological agricultural issues are the easiest part of the problem. It's the complete opposite. The longer the bioaccumulation, the worse the food's going to be. Fit for purpose modelings of radiocesium soil to plant transfer, because in all the forest fires, you're liberating huge amounts that were sequestered in the local areas. See? Fit for purpose modeling of radiocesium soil and plant transfers for nuclear emergency. So fit for purpose is if they have a nuclear meltdown, rather than evacuate you, they're going to say it's okay for you to get a massive dose because it's emergency. So now it's okay. And we see them do this routine all over the place for decades. This is their favorite routine. They're like, cut your throat, not the nuclear industries. That's the main part is the privileges and payments of the people living on the contaminated territories, which are not really contaminated anymore. So they keep making these assertions that are simply not true. The conditions of the vegetative nervous systems in the Belarus children after Chernobyl. Eye-opener. Under 3% of the children exposed, I mean, there's still 6,000 children a year getting open heart surgery because of they're being born with incredible, and this is not in the local area, this is long ways away. This is in Belarus and Ukraine and other places. To Chernobyl radiation while in the womb were diagnosed as healthy at the age of 7. Less than 3% of the children were healthy. But homes full of the most grossly deformed children we'd have ever seen in the history of pediatrics all around Chernobyl, Belarus, and Ukraine. Soil and plant-based countermeasures to reduce, this is 2001, cesium and strontium uptake by grasses in the natural meadows. Now look at all the people that on that study. It's very simple to get one of them to write the story saying the food is safe in Chernobyl, right? They're willing to cut your throat because that's how they make a living, is writing these stupid studies that deny everybody a future. The assessment of the influence of Chernobyl on birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. So it wasn't just Belarus and Ukraine that had these children being abandoned. Country after country was contaminated severely. Radiocesium levels in human muscle samples in Greece 1 year after, 1988. Thyroid cancers in Bulgarian children and adolescents. Prognosis and facts 10 years after Chernobyl, 2001. So, again, there's 6,000 children getting open heart surgery a year. Jim Smith should be one of them, right? He should have to go down there and tell each one of the children that it's like a banana and a potato chip. Self-help countermeasure strategies for population self-help in a nuclear wasteland with contaminated areas of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. A study of heart particles collected in Sweden 1 year after. Well, these hot particles, this evidence, these studies, means it's never going to go away. That's the confirmation, 1988. And these foundations that go over and help the victims and bring them some relief, you got 30 to 40 of these abandoned children per nurse. I wouldn't even call them nurses, caretakers. And we've seen heartbreaking stories where the children, when asked what they would like from Christmas or something, would say like a radio or a TV so they have some entertainment. Nuclear industry could resolve all of this, you know. Face up to the music, take care of the victims, and help the victims that are hurt. I mean, the hospitals right now are full of victims from radiation fallout. For the last 80 years, this is the majority of people that go to the hospitals are the victims of the nuclear industry, right? Because it doesn't manifest right away. A lot of these illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries are latent. They don't show up too much later. Lifetime accumulation of cesium and potassium-40 in the ribs. Why would you invoke potassium-40? And so I struggle with that a lot of times. I'm assuming it's just to be a piece of shit, right? But there's another thing, because the cesium, like the gammas, will displace the potassium-40. And so another way of quantifying the other radiation is measuring the potassium. Is that what's going on? I don't know. Because everything got potassium in it, right? You know, Jim Smith should go down there with the kids there and explain why he's so wealthy. right? And why they don't have nothing. And they never will have nothing because of people like Jim Smith, right? In the University of Portsmouth. This is why these children will always be like this, is because those universities, those professors' job is to make sure that you don't understand they exist. And you got to keep them down the entire time. And, you know, this is an industry that built Nagasaki, Hiroshima back on the bomb craters so they can study them for generations, which means their children get the job studying when they retire, and their children get the job studying the victims when they retire. This is how they think. This is their ideology. This is their religion. I'm going to get my socks off, man. The heat waves last now tomorrow, between tomorrow and Tuesday, we're supposed to get around 60 plus millimeters of rain, which is nothing I know to what happened to Florida or happened to some parts of America recently, but it's definitely going to be a doozy. And 35 to 45 they're expecting on Tuesday. That's going to be hardcore, which is bizarre. It's been raining down here for a month. We got a few good days in, and now we got massive rain coming in. Just shocked me when I seen the change in the forecast tonight. Evaluation of brain functional disorders in Chernobyl patients. All these abandoned children that Jim Smith will go, the farms are good, put them over there where the abandoned children's orphanages are too. But the government is unable to announce these territories as uncontaminated because of the threat of massive protests. Well, the victims, loved ones, and the people that work there will protest, right? We can't keep up with the damage already. DNA damage repair and urinary bladder carcinogenesis induced by chronic low-dose ionizing radiation after Chernobyl. Urinary bladder. So we see lesions on the bladder, cancers, urinary on the bladders. The intellectual development, mental and behavioral disorders in the children from Belarus exposed in utero following the Chernobyl accident. The evidence we got is just stunning. That growing food there is definitely not a very good idea. Potential for disease initiation by inhaled beta-emitting nuclear particles. Just ask the caretakers what they think of Chernobyl, growing food there, and see what their response are going to be. Disorders and changes in the bloods of children living in areas polluted by Chernobyl. Leading to development delays, congenital malformation, mental retardation, infertilities. And right, so we got these angels, these foundations will go down, and some of the, probably the first time the child's ever been picked up. Government bodies are afraid of negative public opinion, but the war requires optimization of the use of public funds. So, like, the idea is because they lost farmland, then Chernobyl is a good idea, and they need to. I mean, how New Scientist, the journalist that wrote the article, the massive media, which is New Scientist, that allowed it to happen. I don't understand these people at all. I don't comprehend. I really don't. And Jim Smith at the University of Portsmouth, and we've covered him probably 100 times. And he's a despicable monster. He's an animal. Somebody should stop this animal, put him in jail. This is a monster, right? This guy. Transport of radioactive iodines 131, cesium-134, cesium-137 from the fallout, 1987, the year after Chernobyl, into cheese and other cheese-making products. So when you see all of this documented, then you can assume you're looking at 500 million victims anyway. Because, you know, you're talking 38 years, and this stuff has manifested since then many, many times, right? Also said that we are exposed to small levels of radiation every day. So he's going to conflate it with natural stuff, which is the lowest form of life conceivable, which is despicable. Like, I don't understand that kind of contempt. That's what he does for a living, too. He does it all the time. Cesium-137 contamination, 104 curies per square mile in Chernobyl. So 3,840 square miles is a strict radiation dose control zones, 3,800 square miles. So a Becquerel, which is an atom, is the pulse from an atom, an antipathetic man-made atom, basically, in layman terms, and it pulses energy every second. It might do that for 1 million years. And so a curie is 37 billion pulses a second. That's a curie. And so potassium, which is they're talking about, they said we're exposed to small levels of radiation every day, including in the food we eat. So he's talking about potassium. So potassium is 71 10 millionths of a curie per gram, but cesium's 88 curies per gram, 88 times 37 billion. And strontium-90 is 140 times 37 billion per gram, versus potassium, which is 0.000071 curies per gram, and is freaking healthy for you. Your body, everybody absorbs it naturally. You use it up, and your body bioaccumulates. It's homeostasis. You don't accumulate any more, rather. You don't bioaccumulate any more than your body naturally is equalized to, right? The body controls it naturally, homeostasis. So it's like how a thermostat controls the temperature in your house, or a car's cruise control controls the speed of your car. Potassium-40, your body regulates it the exact same way. Everything does on the planet has that particular attribute. But man-made, we bioaccumulate it. We have no regulations of it. We can bioaccumulate it until we're producing so much white blood cells, they call that leukemia, and then we die, right? So to invoke that we're exposed to natural small levels of radiation every day, including the food we eat, it's not a crime, right? It's not illegal for them to do it. But it's unconscionable that they would. I don't know how... it's hard to compare because it's so evil. So, if this was cyanide, right, and they were telling you it's okay to eat it, everybody would get that right away. Y'all go like that. That's insane. Arrest this criminal. And police would probably show up and arrest him because he's advocating eating poison. If I sit here at night and say it's safe to eat cyanide and you can buy it at my website and eat all you want, I can guarantee you the police are going to show up and arrest me, and appropriately so, right? It'll be outrage. I'll make it into the news before I can get to sleep tonight. Cleanup of urban areas in CIS countries contaminated by Chernobyl failure. Imagine all these countries got to clean up the urban areas. You can't clean up the rest of the country, but got to clean up the urban areas. And here's Jim Smith from the University of Portsmouth, and New Scientist trying to sell you a wolf ticket to hell, right? The wolf ticket to get sick on. 90 strontium, 137 cesium, 238, 239, 240 plutonium, 241 americium. Distribution in the Alpine wetland, which is France. They found hot spots in the Alps, in the glaciers of France, including in the food we eat. And so we've heard this narrative from Jim Smith from the University of Portsmouth at least 100 times in the last couple of years alone. He's a very busy monster. And there's no one to hold him accountable. The universities are funding him. And he's put on a pedestal. Hey, we need a monster. Well, get Jim Smith. He's really good. Or Kathleen Higley or Jerry Thomas from Imperial College of London. They're monsters. They're the same as Jim Smith. Jim Smith's an exceptional monster, right? And he's a professor. Has access to people's children, for goodness sakes. Anybody that's sick enough to manipulate and kill these children, imagine what he's going to do with the children in his class when, well, you're going to fail unless you get in the back room here. And how many young girls got pushed in that room, I wonder? Plutonium isotopes in surface era Prague in 1986 to 2006. In the surface era for 2 decades. Oh, I'm sorry, 3 decades. 86, 96, 2006, right? 2 decades. What are you doing studies like that for? What it's safe for at a nuclear plant in Chernobyl to grow the food data is like a banana. It's like a potato chip. 15,000. He said that 15,000 deaths from cancer in Europe following the disaster pales in comparison to the estimates of the death from air pollution. So this is that's an interesting lie right there. That's the first time I think I heard that one. Well, it's like they done a study from the University of Medical, New York's University or Medical. Let me see if I can find it actually. From the, I think it was 5,000 studies got translated. Let me see if I put. Oh, that's one of them. I got the original story there somewhere, but we'll use that one. Scientists, Chernobyl resulted in approximately 1 million deaths worldwide as of 2004, and about 500 million heart problems and liver problems and lung problems, and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline. Yeah, this was the New York Academy of Sciences, and they translated 5,500 studies, was it? I think it actually. And turned out I was considered around 1 million people died. It would have been infinitely worse than that, though, for like the reality of it, right? Heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary. As soon as you get into the thyroid and adrenaline, the pituitary, you're producing radioactive hormones, you're producing radioactive stem cells. Your immune system is compromised, so you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless, right? Now we're lethal. Down syndrome in Scotland. Incidences of illegal abortion, congenital abnormalities in Hungary. It totally just isolated to the local areas, Dana. Jim Smith at the University of Portsmouth. And so the University of Portsmouth is one of our worst enemies on this planet. They're definitely one of the most hateful universities I've come across, and we've come across them all, I do believe. The Atlas of Cesium Disposition on Europe after Chernobyl. The Atlas of Cesium Disposition. Well, everything's okay locally. We can grow food. Jim Smith said so. The transfer of cesium from soils to plants is well known, well established, and is brutal. And it's not just cesium. Every time you hear cesium, you got to think about all the other isotopes that are going to be in that same sample. Foliage absorption and leaf fruit transfers of cesium in fruit trees. There's tons of studies saying how stupid it is to grow food in a nuclear wasteland, that's for sure. Behavior of radionuclides in soils and crop systems following the contamination. Radioactive 4 exploded at the Chernobyl plant during a test, spreading radioactive isotopes of elements, including iodine. These children, it's not iodine, folks. Jim Smith, University of Portsmouth. I'd see him go out and tell these children that it's like a banana and a potato chip. I like to see Jim Smith tell her that it's harmless. Jim Smith, the University of Portsmouth. He must look into the mirror every morning. That's what he says. Jim Smith. Like, oh, I'm a professor. I can't believe my luck. They have no idea I'm actually a monster. That's what he says to the mirror every morning. He's probably got like 50 mirrors in his house so he can look at himself everywhere he goes. But when these people from United Kingdom Foundation brings these victims from Chernobyl each Christmas over to give them a few days away from the madness that they live into and these being abandoned in these orphanages. Jim Smith doesn't go down there and pass out candy, I can guarantee you that much. Jim Smith, when he goes to Chernobyl, don't go there and tell the children how lucky they are. Eh? 6,000 open heart surgeries a year on children paid for by British foundations. Not Jim Smith, of course, the University of Portsmouth. And everything with the nuclear industry, right? We see this perpetual. Wall Street Journal officials sharply raised the radiation levels for residents to get iodine pills after the meltdowns in Japan, 75 times higher than the batshit crazy United Nations World Health Organization already recommends, which are always going to be just lethal amounts. They raised it 75 times higher. And they probably, Jim Smith, University of Portsmouth, probably played a part in it. If it's evil, he's all in, man. He'll fly across the country on his own number. He'll do it for free. Street creds, right? Being a monster. Street creds comes in handy, I bet. Chernobyl soil declared safe for farming. 38 years after the nuclear disaster. The role of the rivers in Chernobyl radio ceased in delivery, distribution, accumulation of coastal sediments, the northern Adriatic seas. It's been studied. It's everywhere. There's no safe area in Europe, let alone Chernobyl, my goodness. Chernobyl soil declared safe. Have a nice day. The assessment of radiation doses in the Republic of Croatia after the Chernobyl. Because, there's enough to go around everybody, and every species and every insect. And nothing's safe from this stuff on top of that. It means large farmlands, which were classified as contaminated and been left alone since 1986, can once again be used for growing crops. And this, the journalists there, that's how they make a living, right? They run out with these stories. They get a big kickback. They don't write the story. It's the same. All of them ran the same story, but they got a different name on each story, right? Right? They didn't write the story. They built an audience on cat videos, and then they feed them this stuff from the propaganda machines. That's how the world really works. Study on plutonium isotopes determination in soils from the region of Poland. Plutonium isotopes in soil from Poland. Activity of cesiums in game and mushrooms in Poland. So not just plutonium, it's everything in Poland and everywhere else, unfortunately. Chernobyl soil declared safe for farming, though. This is another monster. Radiation levels gone down below the levels regarded as unsafe in large farmlands near the site of the Chernobyl radioactive nuclear reactor disaster site. According to a survey carried out in the areas, go tell those children, that is the 6,000 children's families each year who get an open heart surgery, how harmless that place actually is. Biomagnification straight up the food chain, and it's the entire Europe after Chernobyl minimum, but we know it's worldwide. That means that the large farmlands were classified as contaminated and have been left alone since 1986, can once again be used, said one expert. And it can help Ukraine's growing demand for farmland, more so at a time when the war with Russia has led to a major part of arable land turning into a combat zone. So clearly that's the reason this story showed up, isn't it? Never waste a crisis. Let's poison everybody and make it think that is a good thing. Can help Ukraine's growing demand for farmland. The toxic cloud that spread over the Soviet territory exposed approximately 8.4 million people to nuclear radiation. And over 250,000 people developed cancer. 250,000 people developed. We know there's over 1 million died, and the translated studies from the New York Medical University. And approximately 100,000 cases ended up being fatal, according to Degenerate Greenpeace, disgusting Greenpeace, who refused to show pictures of Reactor 4 that I text them. They just blocked me, right? Beyond the damage incurred by the human beings that pervasive to this day, the Chernobyl disaster wreaked havoc across the landscape by causing extensive damage to crops, plants, and infrastructure. These surveys were aimed at finding out the radiation effects on the flora and the fauna, and also how much of it still continues to be present in the area. And a new article by New Scientist. They really are the worst humans you'll ever come across, aren't they? There's probably going to be 2 parts to this show tonight. And the second part, though, we'll call it Fukushima, I guess, but I'll articulate it before the show. Because there's no way we're going to get through everything I got put together yesterday. Yeah, I just dropped everything I was doing and put the show together. Once I read the story, I was disgusted. It was disgusting. And so you got the same story with a slight twist, some more documentation or some lesser. 80% of the surveyed area around the disaster site can be used once again. Surveyed in the area for over a decade, it came to a conclusion based on the radiation levels it found in the region. And I just showed you all the other countries are just incredibly radioactive. Radiation farmland around a disaster site. It's just absurd that sentence exists, right? According to the report, the biggest health threat following disaster was posed by the iodine-131 isotope. Reading at this little small paragraph and the big headlines, a big header, radiation levels in farmland around the disaster site. So people read that single one, they're like, honey, the iodine is gone in 8 days. Woo! We're getting some Chernobyl pickles in the morning. The biggest health threat is Jim Smith from the University of Portsmouth. And then, however, it's just a half-life of 8 days. So you got to be absurd degenerate, an absurd monster to write a story like this. You got to be an absurd monster. Can you imagine how weaselly you got to be to sit there and type this up and then publish it? Can you imagine what kind of absolute monster you got to be to engineer that story, like Jim Smith from the University of Portsmouth and the University of Portsmouth? And he's probably had some help, no doubt, from the International Atomic Energy Agency and a little bit of help from the Nuclear Energy Agencies. And you never get used to the evilness of these people. We cover it constantly every day. We never get used to it. It always shocks the living daylights out of me that they sat there and wrote it and then they published it. And when they had their latte or whatever, they probably gave a big tip to the coffee girl and told her that they're a nuclear expert from the University of Portsmouth. The site is turned into a forest, may be given the status of a natural reserve in coming years. And when you hear it talking about how the wildlife is reclaimed, it's always the migratory animals, the bears, the moose, the caribou, or the wolves and stuff like that. It's always the big migratory animals with a short life, basically. It's despicable. They don't talk about the biota, the insects and stuff like that. They only talk about the big migratory animals, and they call it. And they got documentaries out there. It's hard to escape it if you're looking up nuclear. All this propaganda, it's impossible to escape it. It's literally impossible to find me. We didn't find a higher level than permissible, New Scientists quoted the monster. The monster quoted the monster, I should say. However, researchers have stated that they have found high radiation levels in some areas, but it wouldn't transfer to crops or to products. But how does it not? Explain that away, please. They don't, right? They just come out with this absolute garbage can diagnosis. Moreover, if farming is resumed in the area, the product will definitely be checked for radiation. And these are the last people you want to trust. I would rather have Jeffrey Dahmer on one side, Ted Bundy on the other side of my house than a nuclear scientist or a nuclear academic or a journalist. Because the serial killers got nothing on these monsters. Chernobyl fallout and prenatal mortality in England and Wales. Just 3,000 kilometers away. But it's okay there at ground zero to grow food. Can you imagine how evil Jim Smith actually really is? Like, we've covered him over 100 times with the same song and dance. No matter where he goes, wherever there's a problem, he shows up and everything is great. It's like an airplane. Like flying on an airplane or sleeping next to somebody. Right, Jim? Estimated lifetime affected doses to hunters and their families in the 3 most contaminated counties in Sweden after the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident in 1986. A pilot study just to see if it goes well, I guess, is it? There are some problems which remains to be sorted before the land can be allotted the uncontaminated category, and that includes taking the local population into confidence. I'll give them $6 extra a month. They'll probably go, oh, yeah, boy. That's what their pensions are, right? $6 a month. I'm not kidding you. The conversation will stop flowing once this happens. This will have a large-scale impact. Yeah. To call these people monsters is actually being polite, and you're doing them a favor probably because they're proud of it. Further, the ownership of the land will also have to be decided, but these measures are more political than technical and can be sorted out sooner than later if the administration deems fit. The Ruskies, New Scientist quoted. New Scientist, New Scientist. Down syndrome and time clusterings in January 1987 in Belarus linked with the Chernobyl. Congenital abnormality registry in Belarus. A tool for assessing the public health impact of Chernobyl. Chernobyl, prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. And so what I decided to do there, now I got to that stage, I decided I was going to look at their Fukushima stories. So I typed, like I'm the idiot that I am, I typed in Fukushima and I got the phone book of scumbags. Of course, I can't resist that. And so that's probably where I'm going to pick up tomorrow night is the phone book of scumbags. You know what I mean? Because it's hard to comprehend why they're so evil. Right? That's the one problem that I got is why are so many of these people so friggin' sadistically evil? Why are they so crazy? Why do they hate you so much? Why are they willing to sacrifice you for their job as a professor? Is the job really that great? And couldn't they have found another way to make a living than genocide? Is that a crazy thought? Am I insane for suggesting that? All right, so see where we're standing. I think we're in pretty good shape for. Colette donated $30 on the weekend, and I know Mark and Nancy R donated $50. James donated a couple of hundred, and so that's $280. So I'll put the rest of it in there, and we'll get the site back up and running for another year. It's like you can donate there, but and I can still do stuff there, but I think this is the limit. Today was the limit of not paying for the site for another year, right? This site now is 11 years old, thenuclearproctologist.org. And because we've been at this that whole time before too, right? And then all of my videos, we talk nuclearproctologist.org. So we got to keep the site anyway because that's where all the documentation is too. And for any of the academics, they'll figure out the site quite quick, right? There's the pictures from the research expeditions with the GPSs. And this is clearly an extinction level event, Fukushima is. And I get stressed out every year I notice. It's a lot of, last couple of years, it's pretty stressful. You got to pay for it. It's a big chunk of pie, right? So all equipment, you got to get the registration done, and at the same time, like a week or two later, then you got to reboot the site for an extra, because I missed the original. I got like a $60 penalty, right? So now it's up to almost $400. And we raised $270. I spent like $30 or $40 on fuel the last time out. So we're, take the rest of the money, throw some money with it. We'll get the site back up and running. And I can forget about it. And that's a good thing. I'm really happy with that. We got no options. That's what we got to do, right? Whatever we can raise. We got so many expenses. And but we got a lot of good things too, right? We got everything up and running, and I still haven't got the big boat motor running. Looks like I screwed up, and so I got to tackle that next week, I guess. And it's not going to be a difficult problem, I don't think. It's just something stupid. Probably the solenoid for the big motor because I accidentally got grounded out on the battery, and I screwed up some regular thing on the ignition of the big motor. And because we got the small one boat now working, boat motors are working, and just got to get the big motor. We know that the other kicker is working. So not really. I had a rough weekend, so I'm not really. I screwed up my knee, right? Probably Wednesday or something, and it's starting to get better today. Yesterday wasn't so good, and the day before wasn't so good. I still can do things, but it's weak, eh? And it hurts if I leans on it the wrong way or if I pushes up against anything. So I must have twisted it because I'd done a lot of walking the other day, right? We're out on the quad looking for insects and spiders and that. And I must have twisted. I know there was a couple times I stumbled, but I didn't think I had done damage. But early that night, I started noticing that I got a real problem with the leg, right? Because you're jumping on the quad, right? And so originally you got all this stumbling around, you're out on the quad, stifling hot, and you get home, and about an hour later, then all of a sudden you're like, geez, what's going on there, I wonder? Or tomorrow night I might cover nuclear news cycle that I already got ready, and then pick up this on Tuesday night. But there was an earthquake there today too, as you know, probably most of you, in Japan, off Fukushima Prefecture. And so I'm not sure I know that towns past Fukushima nuclear plant was like a 5.7 on the Richter scale. What they call a low 4 on the Japanese Shindu seismic intensity scale, which is in increments of 0.5, and then it goes to 7, right? And so you got to multiply by 1.428 to get the animosity equivalent. Let's close the poll down, because I forgot to close the poll down last time. Would you eat food, and I know I tricked a lot of people tonight because we had a no vote, which is really unusual, and I apologize for that. Would you eat food from Chernobyl nuclear wastelands so new scientists and Jim Smith from Portsmouth, University of Portsmouth, can make money by misleading or hurting and harming and killing and maiming you and your friends and your families and your loved ones with radioactive food? No. The right answer is no. We had 36 votes. We appreciate it. Let's call it a night, I guess. A lot of work getting the show ready tonight, and it's twice the size it should be. I can only get through half of it. That's okay. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. You have a great night and a great day tomorrow. I'll see everybody tomorrow night. Let me get out of here. There we go. Take care, folks. Thank you for finding time, the energy, and the effort, the courage to listen to the truth. Please think about giving us a thumbs up if you made it this far.